Dear learners and viewers of this module MEV002 Environmental and Occupational Hazards, now we will discuss the occupational hazards that are associated with agriculture and allied sectors, and in specific focus we give dust and ergonomic hazards. I introduce myself as Dr. Sushmita Bhaskar, working in the discipline of Environmental Studies at the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Let us now see the learning objectives of this module. After listening to and reading to this module, you will be able to explain the various respiratory hazards, that is the dust hazards, and also ergonomic problems that are faced in the agriculture and the allied sectors. Now, the ergonomic hazards. So here the main important, like if you see in any agricultural activity, that could include the fruit picking, or it could include the sowing of the seeds or planting of trees, where the agricultural workers have to bend. So this can also give rise to certain musculoskeletal disorders. So ergonomics, maintaining a good posture when doing the agricultural activities, forms an important part of the task. So farm machinery is a leading source of fatalities and injuries in the agriculture, because even the farm machinery, you need to load them, you need to unload them. So bending, and if you do it in an improper way, then that may lead to sprains and strains. In the same way, the farm workers are exposed to several environmental and occupational hazards. The farm accidents have also been attributed to several factors: fatigue, haste and stress. This can also cause the farmers to undertake the activities which are normally not to be done, and that may be unsafe and that may be fatal. Now, the speed and the sophistication of the farm machinery means that even the slightest error by the operator, that can cause serious accidents, because you have these cranes and you have the chainsaws, you have so many equipments that are being used by the agricultural workers. So even if you don't know to operate these machines properly, and if you are in a hurry or in a haste, then the farmers can end up with certain fatal accidents. Animal related accidents also are another source, because when they work in the wild, there may be certain wild dogs or certain animals which can come in between, and that can also cause certain accidents and injuries in the field of agricultural workers. Now, specific sources of injuries on high priority in the agricultural subsector. This will include the motorized vehicles and heavy machinery. That includes the terrain vehicles, utility task vehicles, industrial vehicles. Then also the livestock can be affected. Then suppose they are standing at a height, for example tea plucking or the coffee beans, the coffee planting and this cultivation. So all this, they have the contour slopes, and they need to sometimes stand and work at heights. So there may be falls associated with working at heights. Then the grain bins and augers, that can also contain certain infectious agents, and by bending and by attending to the livestock or attending to these bins, then carrying them from one place to another, all this can actually put stress onto the body. The same way the heavy machinery, sometimes the big logs of wood on the trees, they are being cut, they have to be transported and put onto the trucks and other heavy vehicles. Here again their hands, the wrist, the muscles, all that could be fatigued out, and that can result in certain ergonomic problems. So musculoskeletal disorder in agriculture includes the illnesses of the back and the neck. So they may also have certain problems of spondylitis, then epicondylitis, nerve entrapment syndromes, peritendinitis, tendinitis, tenosynovitis, and also certain non-specific muscle and forearm tenderness. These are all encountered by these workers. But however, the majority of the musculoskeletal problems from the farmers and the farm workers is non-specific, and it lacks also a well-defined clinical diagnosis. Now, even in the dairy workers, they will have to take out the milk from the udder of the cow. In that case also they may be affected. For a long time they may be actually keeping their hand in a certain position and taking out the milk. So there again they can have a hand strain, and then the sitting position, they may not be sitting on a desk or on a stool for comfort, but on the ground in a squat position. All this will count, and of course the age is an important factor. When they are a little bit old and when they suffer from other metabolic diseases and syndromes, then again the muscle and the bone may not coordinate for doing these activities. So the occurrence of the specific disorders and syndromes are not accurately known, because many of these conditions are difficult to classify from the epidemiological studies. Some involve the stretching while fruit picking, bending for planting, weeding and picking from the low rise plants. Some plants are low rise, so you need to bend in order to take out those plants or to plant them, and also even to take out the weeds from in between, because certain weeds, when they start growing, that you cannot do that in a mechanized way. You have to take it out using certain kurpa and other equipments. So that again would put a stress on the back of the workers. Then lifting and carrying the heavy weights, handling machinery, driving long distances. Okay, this also is an important factor. Pulling and pushing, this can also cause the health hazards. So therefore, musculoskeletal disorders they occur, including the lower back pain, strains and sprains with the spine, legs, hands, shoulders and the neck. Tobacco harvesters, for example, they can develop the wrist problem due to continuous wrist movement when collecting the tobacco leaf by hand, and the same way dairy farmers also, as I discussed earlier, they also can get the wrist affected when they are involved in the mechanized milking process also. Therefore, exposure to the weather extremes while in the field, they may lead to hypothermia, frostbite, sunstroke, heat stroke, dehydration and even skin cancer. So these are the hazards that are that they contract due to the exposure to the weather extremes. Livestock farming, this also makes a major contribution to the food industry, and it is a main source of income for many families world over. Many of the zoonotic diseases such as anthrax, tinea capitis are associated with the skin contamination. Therefore, improvements in the animal husbandry practices, efficient ventilation, frequent vaccinations of the animals, quarantining sick animals and good personal hygiene, all this can reduce the risk of contamination. Another important factor is tending to a sick animal. This also presents the risk of contracting rabies as well as tularemia. So animals are associated with allergies such as hives, swelling, nasal discharge, itching and also asthma. Working with these animals can expose the farmers to the risk of contracting flu virus, for example psittacosis, swine flu, avian flu and so on. So exposure to even animal urine can also transmit the cryptosporiodosis. So these are certain other biological hazards that are faced by the farmers and the farm workers in the agricultural and the allied sectors. Now, a farmer's work involves carrying excess loads. They have long hours of standing, reaching, bending and other tenuous postures. All of this can continually, when they do it for hours together and they do it for days and months and years together, then that can accumulate, and that can lead to certain joint, back, hip pain and also certain injuries. So therefore, in dairy farming also, manual milking is considered the most hazardous to the musculoskeletal system, because the farmer will have to bend and they may be having certain improper postures, and it is not that from one cow that they take out the milk. Milking may have to be done even 3 to 4 cows or even 8 to 9 cows for getting the sufficient amount of milk. In mechanized milking, the farmer doesn't have to bend, but again they go around making the cows stand in their position, or sometimes even holding those equipments. So sometimes they need to put stress on their wrist and on their hands or the arms, and here again the musculoskeletal risk and the this is crucial. And the parlor design. Parlor design means that is where the animals are being milked. That entire entity, that designing of that is very critical and important. So here you see how the mechanized milking occurs, where the cows are made to stand in a specific position, and this repetitive actions when you are tending to so many of the cows, that can also lead to arthritis of either the hands and in manual of course the legs. So most of the well developed milking facility, they will allow the simultaneous milking from the several cows. At one time from several cow you can milk it, and the farmer will normally stand at a lower level than the animal and he doesn't have to bend. Then the milk is piped into a mass storage container so that the worker doesn't have to carry the buckets manually, because in the manual sector they will have to transport those buckets or the milk containers to other places. So there again they are exposed to certain ergonomic hazards. Other work activities in the agriculture, they again require bending and twisting actions, and they also pose the similar risk to the workers. Catching poultry for transportation, that can lead to the musculoskeletal disorder, because a worker needs to reach the struggling birds, because the birds are being put into captive. So this is also another problem. Now that was all related to the ergonomic and the musculoskeletal disorders. Now let us focus on to some dust allergies. Though we have discussed some in the respiratory hazard section, we will discuss a little more about the dust allergies here. So respiratory disease is a major occupational health focused and faced in the agricultural sector, and an incidence of occupational asthma that occurs, and it is several times the national average. The most common cause of asthma thought among the agricultural workers is due to exposure to the agricultural dust. Now, the agricultural dust that can come from the grain dust, the poultry dust, and it can be a complex mixture of the organic and inorganic materials. They can be derived from the microorganisms, toxins, microbial spores, animal feces, plant dust, soil bedding, the feed components, and also certain chemicals. So when the dust is inhaled, it can again trigger an allergic reaction in the respiratory system of some people, and sometimes subsequent exposure, even a small amount, that may produce symptom. So the symptoms are normally asthma, then coughing, wheezing, there can be chest tightness, and other conditions include the runny nose, stuffy nose, that is rhinitis, conjunctivitis, which causes itching and inflamed red eyes. Now this is a figure of the poultry dust, okay, where the chicken and the chicks are actually grown. It could be, they can be roaming around freely in a field or in the contained areas when in small parlors and cabins. So now they can have a complete mixture of organic and inorganic materials like the soil, the bedding, the feed material, the feed components, and it is a dusty area. So here the poultry dust also is an important thing that a farmer can inhale. They include chemical and therapeutic additives, then feces, the feather of the organism, and that also may contain certain biological agents. So this has microbiological, invertebrate contaminants, chemical as well as organic as well as the inorganic materials. Now they can be hazardous. For example, there can be ammonia and nitrogenous material, dust and softwood dust can exist, bacteria and endotoxins are there, it can create allergic airway response, then there are certain asthmagens, and finally all this will lead to respiratory distress. Finally we come to the grain dust. So this can be a mixture of particles of the grain, the soil, the plant material, fungi, bacteria, residues of agricultural chemicals, and the excreta of insects, rodents, and the birds. So this mixture varies with the type of grain, growing conditions, and how it was harvested, stored, and processed. The spoiled grain is especially contaminated with dust and also with bacteria. Dust can affect the respiratory tract, it can cause gastrointestinal problems, skin rashes, eye irritations, and every individual can respond differently to the same type of dust particle. Everyone's work history, the health status and history would be different, and that needs to be understood. While some may be sensitive to some dust, the others may be able to withstand it for the longer periods. So what does all this dust, what can it cause? It can cause inflammation of the air passages, that includes the upper airways, acute bronchitis, asthma causing grain asthma or barn allergy, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, obstruction, toxic organic dust syndrome, which is causing the grain fevers, etc., and farmer's lung, where the moldy actinomycetes can also cause certain kind of the grains and all that to be contaminated, and when those particles are inhaled, then the farmers and the workers can get affected. So we also need to know the control measures that can be taken for the farmers and for the agricultural workers. Now in the case of the grain and the dust allergies that we discussed, here the farmers can actually help, they can reduce and prevent the allergic reactions by wearing certain protective devices. They can wear certain masks, they can wear certain shields, and they can also wear the gloves, they can disinfect themselves with certain agents which are non-toxic to their skin, and they can also work in the ventilated areas to remove the dust. Another important thing is, in the area that they work, they can also wet the floors with water or any other liquid so that the dust will not spread and it will not be airborne. The grain dust, this requires different respirators because they can use certain respirators, but then the grain dust will require a different respirator than those that are used for the cello gas, which occurs where the grains are being stored and where the farmer's lung and all other occupational hazards can occur. Then another important factor is good ventilation is required, so that the fresh air can actually enter the cabins and the places that we work in, and the chemicals they need to know whether the amount of the chemicals that need to be used, and the hand vibration equipments, like there are chainsaws, then the other equipments are being used, and all this can actually cause the musculoskeletal problems. So maybe they can take some time to work from that. Like for example, if they are working for 20 minutes, then they can have a rest of 15 minutes or so, or the workers can also work in shift. For example, if they are working with the chainsaws for a specific period of time, after that they can go and do some tree planting or some other activities. In the same way, transporting the heavy loads also, from one truck or from one equipment, and also handling of the grains, the storage, they are all actually put into big sacks and the grain bags. So these also, they are manually taken on the back of the workers. So that is so much, it puts so much of stress on the back of the workers. Here again, certain technological innovation can be done and designed, where you have those small trams or the tracks that work in the agricultural field, and then these things can be transported, so that the risk of the musculoskeletal disorders also can be prevented among the agricultural care workers and the farmers. So these are certain control measures that can be done for the hazards that are encountered by the workers. So my dear learners and viewers of this module, we have discussed about the ergonomic problems and the musculoskeletal disorders that are faced by the agricultural workers and those who work in the allied agricultural sectors, and the hazards of their profession, and what kind of joint and bone and other wrist kind of abnormalities that they can be faced with. In the same way, we also discuss certain dust allergies. In specific, we discuss certain poultry dust and also the grain dust, where this dust can have a mixture of the organic, inorganic, they can have certain chemicals, and they can also harbor some infectious biological agents. I hope you have had a good understanding of the same. Thank you for your patient listening.